Welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 94. Today, our guest is Lawrence Gowan of Styx. Thank you for taking time out of your busy morning or stop and chat about the new record.
Thank you. We want to talk it up. And have you had a chance to hear it?
Yeah, I have.
Good.
And I was really impressed, I got to say. I've been a fan since, 1978 or so. Amanda hooked me up with a copy of the album. And I was really blown away because, it reminded me of Styx, but it also seemed like you guys had reached a point in your careers where you just wanted to make the best album you could without much regard to making it sound like a classic Styx album from the 70s. And I'm curious how much of that legacy sound hovers over your heads when you're making a new record, and how much is it considered, or is it at all?
I think that's a great place to begin. That really is. And what you just said before, that just quote yourself, make that the article. Okay. But it's a funny thing. You're in a band that has such a legacy, stretching back nearly half a century, nearly 50 years. So it's a few months away. So you're constantly aware of the shadow, but I don't mean that in a negative way. It's a great thing to have that shadow looming over you, that you want to make sure that you're making new music that's consistent in quality, at least with what preceded,
Sure.
And there's that mandate. Then along with that, there's a certain paradigm sonically that makes sense for the band. You should be able to hear in just about any Styx song, there's a few exceptions, but in just about any Styx song, you should be able to hear two guitars, you should hear, drums, bass, and you should hear some keyboard representation that's either one of these four things: piano, B3 organ, synthesizer, or I'll call it the alternate keyboard, which could be a Rhodes or an accordion or harmonium or some novel sound that goes along with it. So with that in mind, we're not going to lean toward a lot of record scratching sounds or kind of anything that falls under a genre that doesn't fit with classic rock.
Or even like modern keyboard tones probably would be out of kind of on the wrong wheelhouse.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely right. So for myself, I'm in a what I consider a confined area, but I really love it there because that's what I love, those classic rock keyboard sounds, those progressive rock sounds. And I don't think they've ever been greatly improved upon just because you can stack things up now and do all kinds of great tricks. It sounds really cool, but they don't. Everything was pretty much established in the 70s, let's put it that way, with a band of that era, sonically speaking.
Absolutely.
Now, the other side of that, and this relates to what you just said at the beginning, is that it has to live up to that sonically, but it still has to sound like it's something relevant and consistent with who the band is today. And so that's the fine line that we have to walk. And
Sure.
that's not to diminish in any way the fact that, and this is something I say in a lot of interviews, but I'll say it again. The band is the culmination of the effort of everyone who's ever been in it. But the guys who are in it today, they have to carry the vanguard of what it is. So that's with all of that in mind, we try to write songs and we try to record songs that fall under that general wide heading, and therefore make it, as someone like yourself who's been around pretty much since the beginning, it's got to simultaneously sound like Styx and yet sound like Styx has gone somewhere,
Yeah.
And hopefully the place it's gone to is a good place. That's entirely up to the listener.
Well, I think so. I mean, I'll tell you what I hear when I listen to this record. I do hear songs that harken back to the 70s. There are certain ones like Our Wonderful Lives is a good example. It's kind of got a little of that angry young man, it's in D major, but
Yeah.
arrangement wise, it's much more intricate than anything from the 70s, I think. And I think
Yeah.
that's true for most of these songs. It's like when you get to the instrumental breaks, there's a lot more going on than in the old days. They're more elaborate, they're more intricate. And I say all the better for it, you know. I mean, I'd be disappointed if you just made Grand Illusion #5. You know, who wants that?
Yeah.
You know, so I'm glad you didn't.
First of all, you can't, but you can try to make something that stands alongside it in a quality sense, where it's like, yeah, as much thought and as much effort and as much nuance has gone into this record as went into Grand Illusion. If you can do that, then I think you can withstand, you know, any criticism or any sort of alternative view of what the band should be, you know, and I understand those. That's entirely in the minds and in the ears of those who listen to it. By the way, at the beginning of this conversation, Sean, you said the greatest thing I can hear a person say is that when somebody after a show will say to me, "Oh my God, I saw the Paradise Theater tour in 1980 and it was fantastic, and this show tonight was just as good." If they say that, I feel like, okay, your band didn't get wrecked, even though it's gone through some trials and tribulations, as they say.
Yeah.
You know, but your band was ruined. So there's a sense of responsibility that we're going to put on a show that equates with where the band has been, and that we're going to make records that equates and equal with where the band has come from. So that's our little mission here, and we love doing it.
Well, job well done. Bravo. You know, this is, you know, I really love the last album. Speaking of missions, The Mission. And
yeah, right.
And I feel like this is kind of built upon the greatness of that record and kind of taking it to the next level, whatever that might be.
Yeah, that's something. That's kind of what Tommy was saying a lot towards the end of the as we were finishing up the album. He said this feels like everything that all the promise of the mission has come through on this record. And this record kind of had a great follow through to everything that the mission opened the door to.
Yeah.
And I the more I listen to the two records, because I've been rehearsing to get ready for tour, I've been running through the mission stuff and running through the Crash of the Crown stuff. And I think he's right. I think that, you know, I can hear how things have blossomed because the mission was as strong as it was. And quite frankly, it's only because of the success of the mission that we were able to even make this record that Universal came back and said, yeah, do another one. Which you don't hear from many major labels. They're talking
I can imagine. Well, you know, I think a lot of your peers are in that conundrum where, where the fans want more new stuff, but the label's afraid people aren't going to buy enough or whatever. But, you know, Kansas is a great example. You know, they put out a couple fantastic albums in the last 10 years. And I'm so glad they made them, you know. And I'm glad you guys are doing this too, you know, because it's, you know, it's great to hear fresh music from some of your favorite bands that you've loved since you were a kid.
Yeah. Well, there's an example. You know, whenever we play a show with Kansas, that band sounds so bloody good, and they're so honest that it's just great to be able to tour with bands like that,
Sure.
and to keep our enthusiasm with making new music is as strong now as it ever was.
Yeah, and I'd say in the last 10 years they've gone through a lot of lineup changes too, and consistently put on a great show no matter what the lineup is, you know.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I love their return to the more analog sounds. I mean, seeing a Hammond on stage with them, you know, was like, wow. And now, of course, they have Tom Brislin, who's a wizard in his own right. You know, he's something else. But back to you guys.
Yeah.
So tell me, would you consider this a concept album, just like the last one was? But
you know, the last one was fairly obvious. I think this is one of those records, Sean. I think this is one of those records that you can definitely listen to it as a concept. I've had a couple of them talk at me already in the chats that I've had with people. I think you can listen to it as a concept. I think you can listen to it completely devoid of conceptual connection. But what really shocks me about this record is I know that 90% or 80% of it, let's go with that, was written and recorded prior to the pandemic. And yet every single song, every single one to me relates to what the world has gone through in the past year. And I find that really quite odd.
But yeah, I mean, just the titles alone. I mean, Hold Back the Darkness, Our Wonderful Lives,
Yeah.
Coming Out the Other Side. Yeah. I mean, are you telling me that all those were named before COVID even hit?
But, well, you know what? I think to those and Our Wonderful Lives, because I wasn't part of the writing on those two, those were written after the pandemic, or at least I didn't hear them until after we were in lockdown.
Uh-huh.
So because of that, I went, oh, okay. What's great here is this is consistent with what the rest of the album is. Because I kept listening to the songs going, people are going to think we're writing this about this whole world turned upside down, and yet we actually were writing about it prior to that happening. And
it's like
those titles, that's very weird.
It's like you guys had a crystal ball. Yeah. Yeah. So
there's your headline right there.
That's right. So Styx's crystal ball works.
That's like they had a crystal ball. Oh my God, I'm gonna quote you on that one.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, and it's funny. You know, I think the world was preparing in some weird way. We might have had some instinctive foresight that something was going to happen. We didn't know what, but something was about to kind of hit.
Yeah.
And it was going to be. I have that feeling now that and I think we were writing with that in mind. Some dam is about to burst, or some mountain is about to be, reduced to a volcano, which is how, by the way, that's how I see Crash of the Crown relating.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. Yeah, I mean, tell me, for starters, what the name means and how it inspired the rest of the writing.
I'm really reluctant to say it means this, because that takes the listener out of it too much. I like the idea that the listener can see themselves in a song or see their own situation in. But I'll say this: the reason I'm so glad that we wound up going with the title "Crash of the Crown" is that so much of the record focuses on renewal, and the song "Crash of the Crown" to me it's a song about renewal after a great fall or after some cataclysmic event, and about the opportunities that can suddenly spill forth because of such a disaster.
Sure.
We've seen this many times. After the Second World War, suddenly bang, there's all these opportunities that wouldn't have been there had this calamitous thing not happened. I think, and that's part of why, because we began to more and more, the needle kept pointing back to that song about 6 months ago when we were looking for, well, what's the title of this album? That song is the most consistent with the themes of, it starts with a declaration of commitment, and then trying to safeguard yourself or someone close to you, and then the realization that something cataclysmic has happened. So we'll call that the crash of the crown. And finally, there's this resolve, as most Styx songs have. There's ultimately this triumphant resolve of something greater than was left behind. Something greater kind of arriving.
Wow.
And I that is a theme that's consistent with a lot of Styx songs. Come Sail Away and Fooling Yourself, and Blue Collar Man. There's so many of them have that. There's this problem and this great resolve to it that lifts you.
Yeah.
So the crown can be whatever you want it to be. If you want it to be a physical crown, it can be that. For me, it's symbolic of, I keep picturing a mountaintop that suddenly has the summit removed, and this volcano now exists there where things are spilling forth that are both terrible and perhaps triumphant. That's the way I see it.
Wow, well, that's an interesting way of putting it. That's good. That leaves a lot more open to the interpretation for the listener. And I think that's great. Um, so when this was being written, um,
Yeah.
did you? I guess what I'm wondering is, do you guys each individually write songs and then bring them to the band, or are there sometimes songs where maybe you write the verse and Tommy writes the chorus? How does this work?
It's both of those.
Okay.
So for example, the ones that surprise me the most, the ones that I'm most involved with, are are where we have 2 or 3 writers. So that song in particular, "Crash to the Crown," that's a perfect example. No one of us could have written that song. It was it kind of started from 2 separate ends. There was this riff, which is the top of the song, which is the dun 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 dun. That's all it was, right? So I remember Tommy was playing that, I think, in the dressing room, or he gave it to me, or sent it to my iPhone or something. And that's just sitting there. And then one day, we thought, oh, it'd be great if JY got to sing the beginning of the song here. So I always picture JY in a kind of Bowie-esque voice, like he does in Snowblind. Always reminds me of Bowie.
I hear that.
And just that low melody of waypoint on that, I can't even get my voice down there to the same degree he can. And those words kind of came to me because I was sitting by Lake Ontario here, and when it popped into my mind, there was this nautical kind of thing to it. So I sent that, not to Tommy, but I sent it to Will, who's the producer and co-writer on so many of these songs. And Will heard it. It's like, oh, I like where this is going. Now we could make this the whole front of the song, and then turn a corner and do something completely different within one song. So that's where that notion came from.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that arrangement, because it's like, man, it's like a Styx sampler plate, man. There's a little everything in there.
It's basically 3 or actually 3.5 songs jammed together into one 4-minute piece, or less than 4 minutes. And it was at that point that Will said, what if we went right back here and reintroduced the top of the album, the very beginning of the record? So this is where you can perhaps hear a thematic reprisal coming in and going, and that lends itself to the conceptual album idea. But anyway, thematically, we go back to the very beginning of the album. Well, that opened up this notion that, well, now, coming out of that, let's make it some kind of rallying cry. And mostly Tommy and myself began to jam on that whole, I call it the nightclub section, that because it comes into almost a disco beat with that, I know where I'm at, it won't weigh me down,
Yeah.
And so that becomes a separate song. And at that point, Will comes in and says, okay, we've got 2 sections now that work really well. We haven't repeated ourselves even once. There's no repetitive chorus. We've got this thing that's rolling. And out of the bag, Tommy pulled out that whole ending section of the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which is almost like a 50s thing,
Right.
and then he had that whole back end of the truth will be the light through the darkness tonight, right?
Yeah.
And that, when we finished it, we thought, okay, so now do we expand these into other songs because and then as the record continued, we were like, no, this is like a little bit of to our mind anyway, it's a little bit of that side 2 of Abbey Road thing where you suddenly have 2 or 3 tiny songs jammed together, but they all kind of comprise one song without ever repeating something.
Yeah, well, when it first surfaced, a lot of people were asking, oh, is this like the first song? Is this like an overture that's giving us little samples of everything else? And it's like, actually, it's not, but I can understand why they might think that.
Me too, because when we finished it, we thought, okay, let's expand these into other songs. But then it began to sound like a song unto itself. again, I'd say it's a little bit somewhere between, if you wanted to if you really need to pigeonhole it, I would say it's somewhere between when you go from, let's take side two of Abbey Road. You know, Sun King, Pauline Pam, she came in through the bathroom window, Golden Slumbers. If you kind of took that little section, it's like there's like 4 separate songs, but they all kind of cascade into each other in a way to make them one song.
Yeah, and kind of,
again, nothing's ever repeated.
Right.
So somewhere between that and the way that Queen would often make right hand turns, which is why I kind of was doing my Freddie impression on the end of the song.
Well done.
You know, I just thought this is such a triumphant thing, and the way Freddie Mercury would deliver something like that, I don't sound anything like him really, but I mean it's that kind of bravado and real self-assurance had to be there to kind of bring that to close.
Yeah.
So it stands on its own that way.
And it just kind of ends with the big anthemic portion of the song. And and it's just great to hear a song where all 3 of you take a portion of it as lead vocalists too. Has there ever been a Styx song where that happened before? I can think of maybe when they two people shared it, but not 3.
I think that's the coolest part of the song. I think the fact that it's the 3 lead vocalists. The band was always built on 3 lead vocalists. The fact that happens in this one short little piece is really that to me is the real charm of it. You know, the ball. You know, the ball is passed around. You know, the baton is kind of passed around the room, and with all of that, I think it's a song that I knew this is going to be a challenge for people to listen to the first time. But if they're anything like we were, we kept going back to that song. But God, I can't get it out of my head. So that's a good sign.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. What are some other ones that you had a hand in writing on the new record?
Well, they had that song coming out the other side. They already had that.
I thought that was kind of different for you guys. It almost made me think of something I heard Rush do in the late 80s or something. Just the tones, the clean tones and such. It was kind of different.
Yeah, I thought it was really different too, especially the fact that it's, the time signature, I think it's in 9/8 or something. That's a really odd time signature, and yet it works so well in that song because it's part of trying to work out the problem, so to speak. Anyway, where I left off was when we did Common Ground. The prog side of the band is what I've always been most attracted to, and that's kind of that's the part that I'm always pushing and trying to push the agenda of the prog.
Yeah,
Tommy's I make it would still sounds like Styx and has some kind of pop sensibility where people can sing along to it. And I think the push and pull of that is really, I think it really paid off in the song Common Ground. So that's another one I really was involved in a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool track. That was another one I was going to ask about. It's got a little of everything in it, and a great break from Todd in the middle. That's
great, yeah.
So cool.
Fantastic.
So it's got definitely it ticks the boxes when it comes to the prog rock stuff. And I think that's the side of the band I like the best as well. But I totally understand Tommy's thoughts on keeping the balance, because a lot of prog rock can be kind of overindulgent and kind of lose the hooks. And you guys,
that's really, exactly. That's he's always wary of exactly that it becomes self-indulgent and music for musicians. And Styx is not that, it's music for everyone. But at the same time, progressive rock to me challenges everyone. It always throws down a bit of a challenge to say, you can go a lot deeper into this than you might have imagined. And that's why I still listen so much to Jennifer and to Yes and to Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Jeff Hotel. Those are bands that threw that gauntlet down. Styx first band as the UK was successful at doing that.
Well, I love all that, and actually the bulk of my guests on my show are progressive rock and fusion musicians. So that's kind of my audience. So I'm sure A lot of prog folks will be tuning in for this one.
Sean, I hate to do this. Honestly, I'm really enjoying talking to you. I'm supposed to go to the next call at 10.
Oh, I hear you. I know you only had about 30 minutes. That's totally cool, Lawrence. I appreciate it. Hey, you think sometime we could chat about your career if you have time? All right. Well, I'll just reach out to Amanda, maybe later this summer and see if we can set something up where you and I could chat a little more in depth.
Anytime at all. Anytime at all.
Excellent. Cool. And maybe I'll catch you guys when you get down to Atlanta soon. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Well, we do Alpharetta, I think, before the end of this month anyway.
Okay.
Alpharetta before the end of June.
Well, I've been craving a good concert, so cool. Well, I'll let you go, and I hope our paths cross again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Sean.
My pleasure. Well. All right.